Hello everyone. In the last video, we have seen what is a flexbox and explored every single utility that Tailwind CSS has to offer. In the same way, we will explore every utility of Grid today. If you haven't watched the flexbox video, please watch it, as this video will be easier to understand if you watch that first, and also some common utilities that work both for Flex and Grid are covered there. Grid is a powerful layout system that allows you to create complex two-dimensional layouts both vertically and horizontally easily. This provides a grid-like structure, a table-like structure, where you can define rows and columns to position each element precisely. This makes it incredibly efficient for building responsive and adaptable designs, offering control over the arrangement and spacing of the elements. These are the utilities we will explore today. As in Flexbox, there are several outdated utilities here in Grid as well, as CSS in general and Tailwind CSS evolved a lot in the previous years. Some utilities have become redundant and not so useful. I will still explain them just so that you know they exist. Also, you see Justify Stretch as the last utility in this list. It's a Flexbox utility, but it is only used in Grid containers. So I did not explain that in Flexbox video and I added here to explain that. With that said, let's start now. So first, to make a Grid container, we need to use the Grid utility there. So I added Grid here. Let me remove this so that you will see how it is without Grid. So this is how it looks, plain elements without the grid. When you add Grid, you see it's still in the same direction, but because of the gap, you see there is a space between each element. Gap works only in Flex and Grid. If there is no Flex or Grid, then gap doesn't make any sense. It's just redundant. You can remove it. Now the utilities you see on the top left, Grid calls, none, subgrid, these specify how many columns you want. So Grid, I'll add Grid calls 3 for example. And you see now we have 3 columns. And it is from left to right, 1, 2, 3. So this is arranged based on the columns. And if you use Grid calls none, then it's the default behavior. There will not be any columns. And coming to the last utility, Grid calls subgrid. This utility is used to create a grid inside another grid. So in the second example, if you see, this whole item is a grid, and in that this 5, 6, 7, 8 is another grid. So if you see the code on the right side, it has 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like that. And after the 4th element, in the 5th element we have again 4 elements. So this happened because of the subgrid. So inside this main grid, we can create another grid using the grid called subgrid. Coming to grid template rows, these are used to create rows in a grid layout. It's exactly same as the before grid template columns, but instead of creating columns, here it creates rows. If you see in grid template columns, the numbering started from left to right, 1, 2, 3 and so on. But in grid template rows, you see the numbering is starting from top to bottom based on the rows. That's the only difference. Remaining everything works same. These utilities are related to the starting and ending positions of the grid items. These control how much space the grid item occupies and where it can be started or ended. So let's say for example for the first element 1, we'll try to apply these classes and see what happens. So column auto is the default position, so you will not see any changes. It's just implicitly mentioning that it should be in the auto positioning. And call span 2 for example, it occupies the space of 2 elements. Call span full occupies the entire space. Then call start, I'll add 2 here, so it will start at the second position. So see, first there is empty. So this particular utility is telling at what position the element should start. So call start 2 is making the element with 1 starting from the second position. And if you use call start auto, then it just goes back to its original position. Same way, call end, I'll type 3 and it is in the second position. Here I just want to understand, it looks tricky because when we write call end 3, we expect it to be in the third position in general. But what is happening here is call end 3 means this position, this element 1 will end at the third position, means it is ending here. The space between 1 and 2, this is the third element, so it is ending at this, not starting at this. So that's what it means by call end 3, it is ending at the starting of position 3. So if you use call 4, then it will be in the third place because 4th is the next row. So that's that. So whenever you want some element to be in the second position, you just write call end 3 and it will be in the second position. And end auto, again it just goes to its default position. Now these are the grid, row, start and end position related utilities. These also exactly works like the same as columns, but instead of from left to right, these start from top to bottom. I'll just give a simple example. For the first element again, we can just, if we use the row start to, it is coming from this position, not here, because it is row, it is starting here. So that's the only difference. The horizontal and vertical remaining everything it's same. Grid auto flow. To explain this, I have different elements with different width. The width doesn't matter, but it just gives you some idea on what's happening. So by default, if you do not write anything else apart from grid, then the items will be positioned from top to bottom. And what grid flow row is exactly same, but we are implicitly mentioning that the items should be from top to bottom. So grid flow row will not make any change, but grid flow call makes the difference. It arranges the elements from left to right like a column. And now if you use grid rows, like if you specify any number of rows, then this will also be considered. So now there are 2 rows and the direction is the column, so it will fill the 2 rows that we gave, and when that place is filled, then it goes to the next column because of the grid flow call. So that's what this does. And these 3 utilities, actually you don't need to remember them. These seem outdated and they don't make any difference, and they don't give any extra features apart from what we have seen in these 2. So don't worry about these 3 utilities. The next one, grid auto columns. These are used to resize the elements of the container in a horizontal direction. So now we have 5 items, first item, second, third, fourth and fifth. Now what these utilities does is resizing them. So auto calls auto means it just occupies the space based on the content inside each grid item. So now it is auto calls auto, but if I remove it, nothing happens because it's the default behavior. Now let me add minimum, so it will occupy the minimum space that is required. I'll save and see, it's taking the least amount of space that is required. And when we use max, it just takes what it needs. And when we use fraction, fr, this looks similar to the auto, but if I now use auto, you will see a slight difference. I don't know if you have observed it, there is a slight difference. So what is this difference is, when you use auto, it will use the spacing across this container so that based on the content, it arranges these items. For example, I'll add some more text to the first item. See, now we have more items here, more text in the first element. Now if I use auto, it automatically adjusts it based on the content. But when we use fraction, it actually divides the entire container into equal sized elements and then try to fit the content inside that element. Grid auto rows, these are again exactly same, but instead of adjusting them horizontally, these will adjust vertically. That's the only difference. Let me show you just for an example. Now these items are by default, these items are using fraction. Now if I use minimum, see they went to the minimum that they require, and max. So that's the only difference. It's just vertical and horizontal. There is nothing new here. Place content, these utilities controls the position of the elements inside both vertically and horizontally at the same time. So now if I use place content center, the first utility, you will see all these 4 items towards center. See, so that's what we do with the place content utilities. We position the elements both horizontally and vertically at the same time and together as a content, not an individual item. Let's use start and then end and between. If you have seen the flexbox video, you would know this between, around, evenly, stretch, baseline, everything. I'll explain again briefly. So between will be like, it will be in the extreme edges, and if you use around, place content around, then there will be equal space around each item. Means for first item there will be equal space on the left and also on the right. Same for the other elements, there will be equal space on the right and also left. Now if you use evenly, then what this will do is it will have even spacing across the container, and stretch is the default behavior. I said in the intro that we'll use also justify stretch. This also does the same, so that's why you don't see any changes. It's same as not having it, or place content stretch. Next one is the place content baseline. Like in Flexbox, I didn't see any use case for this. If I use the place content baseline, it just goes to the start position, just like place content start. I don't see any difference for this, but theory is that it will align based on the text items baseline, but in reality I don't see the use case for it. I tried several examples, but they did not work, so you can just ignore this baseline. Place items, these utilities work similar to the place content utilities, but the difference is in place content you will see all the items together move from one position to another position, but place items work in such a way that they are respective to their individual grid items. Means this item, it will change only based on this blue background. Means only this grid item, it will change the position based on that. I mean all the elements will change, but respective to this blue background, not the entire container. Let's add some utilities and see. Place items start, for example, you see there is space between. Means the item is positioned in the start place, but inside this grid item, not the entire container. So that's the difference between place content and place items. Now you can change to end, enter. Baseline, again it doesn't work, it's just the start position, and stretch is the default one. So that's place items. The utilities related to place self, they help us place an individual item inside a grid container. Means for example, if you want all the items to be in center, we can use place items center. This will make all the items positioned in the center, but if you want a single element to be positioned according to your need, then we can use this self utilities. So I'll add the first element, I want it to be in the first position, the starting position, so I can use place self start. So all the items are in the center, but this particular item is in the starting position. Same way I can use end, I can use center, and I can use stretch. And auto means the default position. In this case it's center because of the place item center in the parent. So that's what these self utilities do. And that concludes our deep dive into grid utilities in Tailwind CSS. I hope this video has been helpful. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more Tailwind CSS and web development related tutorials. Feel free to leave any questions or suggestions for future videos in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, keep an eye out for an upcoming project where we will blend flexbox and grid concepts to create something beautiful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Happy coding!